IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Today is a Monday morning and we're going to be talking about something that not all of us have on Monday mornings, namely energy. Russia and the European Union are working on building a pipeline to transmit hydrocarbons from Russia to Europe. This is called the Nord Stream 2. And building a pipeline of this size comes with a great deal of very significant geopolitical implications. The Americans are, for example, crying hoarse about it. They've been doing that through the Trump administration and continue to do that today in the Biden administration. And the German president, in order to justify the ongoing progress on Nord Stream, made an extremely strange statement about how Germany basically owes this pipeline to Russia to make up for Nazi atrocities in the Second World War, which of course has some rather strange implications because it means that, of course, Britain basically owes India a lot for colonial reparations, and Russia owes Central Asia and Ukraine a lot for its own imperialism during the Soviet era. But that's neither here nor there. The geopolitical implications, of course, are not restricted merely to Russia, EU, and European relations. They're also tied into the way that Russia deals with Ukraine and could have some effect on American sanctions on various Russian leaders, for example. But let's get into all of these details over the course of this discussion. I have with me today Aditya Pareek. Thank you for joining us, Aditya.
Hi, Anirudh. It's great to be here.
So let's begin by trying to understand first what exactly Nord Stream 2 is, Aditya. How is it different from Nord Stream 1? What kind of capacity are we talking about? And what kind of resources have gone into this project so far?
So Nord Stream 2 is the latest leg of the project, I would say. So, it's a system of two pipelines, and the second pipeline is made up of two strings. So they're operated under two consortiums. So the first pipeline, Nord Stream 1, it operates under a consortium with the Russian state gas company, Gazprom, which is, as we all know, very central to the Kremlin's fortunes, so to say. It's the very jugular of the Russian state's finances, along with Rosneft. So these state companies hold a major stake. For example, the first Nord Stream pipeline, 51% or so of the stake is owned by Gazprom in the consortium which operates it. The second pipeline is, according to Gazprom's website, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Gazprom, although they have other investors, mainly from the European Union. So I think if we talk about the money involved there, according to Gazprom's site, it's about 7.4 billion euros worth of investment. And 30% of the project costs came from equity contributions, which are proportionate to the shares of the venture holders in that consortium. The other 70% of the funds were raised from banks and credit export agencies. So these European investors, along with Gazprom that I mentioned, some of them, according to Gazprom's site, are Royal Dutch Shell, Austria's OMV, ENGIE of France, and Germany's Uniper and Wintershall. So these companies are very central to this current development about Nord Stream, that there's a sort of a crack between the US and EU's approach to the whole matter post 2014 Crimea.
So we'll come back to the US's view on all this later. But for now, can we try to understand what the Europeans are getting out of it?
Well, not the whole EU is agreeable on the same matter. So there are EU members like Poland who are always a bit iffy on Russia. So they aren't exactly agreeable to this project, and Germany, for better or worse, is viewed as this hegemon that inflicts a lot on the other EU members who are not very agreeable to Russia. So they are the central party to this, Germany, who gain a lot in terms of, I don't know, Germany has this tendency to decouple its economic interests with its political interests. So it takes a very selective approach, as far as I understand, to its energy security, the security of investments some of its companies and ventures have made, and being firm on Russia for their perceived way of international politics. So here the whole matter is about energy security and who can supply reliably. So there's this, I don't know if our listeners are aware or not, but Nord Stream 2 is all about liquefied natural gas, and it's something which is very central to European interests when it comes to their harsh winters. So the normal people suffer if energy supplies can't be guaranteed. So the whole industry suffers, people suffer. So it's a huge problem. Yeah, so Ukraine being very close to Central Europe, rather being a bridge to Central Europe and Eastern Europe, has this gas transit network which spans 140 billion cubic meter, and it has a transit capacity of 140 billion cubic meters, and it has a storage capacity of 32 billion cubic meter. So it's probably the largest transit and storage system in the world in terms of gas, in terms of LNG. So I would say it's a part of Europe's strategic security. It's a part of their energy supply security, which is so key in the winter months for the well-being of the populace of the general EU.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is that leaving aside the political entanglements that Russia has gotten into the EU with all these reports of interfering in elections and so on and so forth, Germany is willing to set that aside because achieving energy security is such a overwhelming kind of compulsion that they're willing to make a compromise on this front. I mean, selective is an interesting way to put it. I would just call it cynical, especially given the record a lot of German companies have in terms of working with China, and especially in terms of making use of Uyghur labor. That's something I find extremely ironic. If the German president is coming out and saying that Nord Stream 2 is a way to make up for Nazi atrocities and is therefore taking a principled stand about committing atrocities against people, then why exactly is Germany so okay with doing business with China? It's recently accepted large investments from China, in fact. But leaving that aside, geopolitics is, of course, as we all know, an amoral world. So that's all right. Let's say that yes, okay. So we understand Germany's point of view, but you hinted a little earlier, Aditya, at other divisions within the European Union, and you said that Poland, for example, is not completely okay with this happening, given the fact that Russia is a major security challenge. But what about nations outside of the EU, specifically Ukraine? You talked about how Ukraine has this massive infrastructure for transmitting energy, specifically hydrocarbons. But this infrastructure is mainly meant to move Russian gas from Russia into Europe, right? So what happens to Ukraine when Nord Stream 2 is complete?
Well, the most direct consequence would be that their state finances would shrink because, like Russia, they are also very dependent on the post-Soviet infrastructure that they inherited. So their economy is not very different from the rest of the CIS. And that's Commonwealth of Independent States, the post-Soviet states. So they follow a very similar pattern to what Russia's fortune dictate. So I think it would be a huge blow from which it would be very hard for them to recover. And this is really something that we should discuss when we discuss CIS and not really the European Union as a whole, because it's a very regional issue, not even a continental issue, in my humble opinion. So Ukraine has this vested interest in keeping this transit agreement and its existing hydrocarbon transit infrastructure in place because First of all, if it doesn't get used, it's going to fall into, if it becomes defunct, it would fall into disrepair. And that's going to be something that they won't really have the cash on hand to rebuild if and when another agreement or another geopolitical equation can be worked out through which Ukraine can supply some other country or some other region. So when we talk about outside players in this game, so the US being the chief adversary of the Russian state since the Cold War, and inheriting the same legacy of the Soviet Union post the dissolution, the US perceives this threat to the Western Bloc, that there's a diversionary tactic by Russia. That's kind of very poetic that this pipeline Nord Stream 2 is also seen as a diversionary pipeline, because the transit of natural gas is already taking place. So the product is already being delivered, but the transit fees by Ukraine are the cause of contention. So Russia wants its other geopolitical goals in eastern Ukraine to be achieved through this sort of a limited trade war where they avoid these transit fees. So the US sees this as a threat to that Europe's dependence on Russian gas is compelling them to have a sort of pro-Russia tune on certain issues, that they can't really be so brave and impose all sorts of sanctions. I mean, they do coordinate with the US authorities on sanctions, but they don't go all out like the US. They're very, skeptical in just following the same line that the US gives them. So this leverage that Russia holds over them in terms of energy dependence, the US would ideally want it gone for good.
Okay, so that's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of interesting points that you just made there, Aditya. So what you're saying is Ukraine was basically deriving rent from allowing Russian energy to move into Europe. And you talked about how the risk of losing this energy and the payments that come with that energy could potentially affect Ukraine's ability to be an energy transmitter in future. And of course, there's also the fact that you're suddenly going to be losing out on billions of dollars that Russia pays in transit fees, which of course just reduces your state's absolute power, and makes you more willing to come to some kind of agreement with Russia, which would potentially compromise Ukraine's control over its eastern areas. That's an interesting point. The other point that you raised was that because Europe is going to become even more dependent on Russian energy, then the Americans see that there's a potential that sanctions on Russia are not going to be as effective anymore. That is a point that I find kind of interesting. I personally am not as convinced about the efficacy about sanctions as the Americans are. I find it kind of strange that, for example, Iran, which the Americans have been sanctioning for the last 50 years or so, the revolutionary regime continues to be in power as it has been, while the living conditions of average Iranians have been like pretty miserable over the last few decades. I just find it to be a really weird foreign policy tool, because it doesn't necessarily affect the elites that conduct foreign policy as much, while making life all the harder for most citizens. It just seems like it's something that the Americans do to kind of prove their moral superiority, rather than actually achieve any concrete foreign policy goals. But that again is a discussion for another day. So I understand that the Americans are concerned about the efficacy of their tools against Russia. But what are they really offering the Europeans in exchange? If the Europeans want energy security at any cost, and they're willing to pay the geopolitical and the political price by actually bargaining with Russia, which does not have a vested interest in maintaining the European Union, what are the Americans offering in response? And like, what do the Europeans think of that?
So the US strategy has always been about providing an alternative to the Russian offering, so to say, so that they can, I don't know, attract the traditional Russian allies or in proximity partners of Russia. So the only advantage that Russia currently has over the United States is that it's in much closer proximity to Germany. So Germany's energy needs have to be fulfilled quickly, and they have to be fulfilled in the volume that its consumption demands. So the US's only play here has been that it's been producing liquefied natural gas in Texas in the southern United States, and they've been shipping it across the Atlantic. So, I mean, an LNG tanker takes significantly longer, even if you pre-schedule it. The efficiency just isn't there in terms of time. A pipeline would obviously always be faster in terms of supply and in terms of turning it up a notch, the supplies, or turning them down a notch whenever it's required. So the pipeline versus the this LNG tanker shipping, I don't really think there's even a comparison there. But that has been the only alternative that the United States has been able to put on the table for the EU. And if given enough political will, I suppose if they had the right people in Germany to advocate their cause, maybe this could become one day influential enough that it would a good enough alternative. But as of now, if you want a very good overview of all this, I highly recommend a book by Agnia Grigas. So she's a Lithuanian American. She's a risk analyst in the hydrocarbon industry. And she wrote this book called The New Geopolitics of Natural Gas. It was published in 2017. So it's a bit dated on the current facts, but it gives you a very good overview of what the US strategy has been to displace Russia as the key energy supplier and degrade their influence from the EU.
Okay, so what has changed now that the Biden administration has come into power, Aditya? What, for example, has Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said about this issue?
Well, Blinken hasn't really given us a very direct new approach since he's been appointed Secretary of State. But one of his older writings, if you look at this book called Ally versus Ally, America, Europe, and the Siberian Pipeline Crisis, it was published in 1987. So this is way before he was ever in the picture as far as the US administration is concerned. So, in the Reagan administration back in the 80s, a similar issue arose where Germany was very much dependent on Soviet energy supplies, and this. I found a reference to this quotation from this book that I just named by Anthony Blinken. So this was an article by Niall Schmidt, who's an SPD politician. That's a political party in Germany, which is often in power with the CDU, Angela Merkel's party. So in a coalition. So during the Reagan administration, a similar thing arose, and Anthony Blinken's view on it was, and I'm quoting it, by promoting a more harmonious alliance rather than one divided over an issue as fundamental as East-West trade relations, the West will be in a better position to meet the challenges posed by its adversaries. So you can clearly see that there's this, if you take the very recent last few days, the new developments that have come to light. So there was a report due to US Congress by the Biden administration, which was supposed to talk about Nord Stream 2 and the new sanctions that might be in the picture. So the report came out this Friday, and it cited for new sanctions only the cable laying ship Fortuna and its owner KVT RUS. So that's a private company in Russia, and it was the only one which is being sanctioned. So it's the only new entity that is being sanctioned. It's being singled out. So the only other mention were for about 18 companies. They were mostly insurance companies that are gradually leaving the project. So their contractual obligations aside, they've clearly shown the US that they're pulling out. So that serves the US's purpose. But the thing that both sides of the US political system, the Democrats and the Republicans, are pretty much in consensus that the hydrocarbon exports by the Russian state are the thing that you should really choke. And Nord Stream 2 being the latest development there is something that they've demanded from the Biden administration that they take harsh action on. And the simplest answer to any such developments is always Katsa. countering America's adversaries through the Sanctions Act. So here, both sides of the political spectrum in the US is demanding sanctions, but it the effect won't only be the effect that the US political sphere wants won't only be from sanctioning Russian entities like we saw with sanctioning this cable laying vessel, but it would really come from if they penalized the European entities involved just as much. But notably, there is no mention of any German or European companies that we just spoke of, from which are quoted as major investors in Nord Stream 2 from Gazprom's side. So there's no mention of them.
That's interesting. I kind of it's I kind of understand what a quandary the Americans find themselves in. It's difficult to think of a realistic way to deter this deal from going on, at the same time providing an alternative that the Europeans would be amenable to. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this develops. I don't really think that they're going to succeed in stopping Nord Stream 2, but it is what it is. So before we conclude, Aditya, we've talked a lot about the grand geopolitical chessboard, as it were. But tell us a little bit about Nord Stream 2 itself. From what I understand, it's one of the most ambitious hydrocarbon projects that's been seen in the Baltic region in quite a lot of time. So tell us more about it. Where does it start? How long is it? What countries are connected to it?
So the pipeline is mainly going through the Baltic Sea, and it's about 2,460 kilometers of pipeline being laid. So currently, the work was stopped in 2019 because sanctions were imposed, but it has restarted since December 2020. 2,300 kilometers of the pipeline have already been laid. So that amounts to like 90 to 95% of the work for pipe laying already being done. And if you talk about specific areas, about 120 kilometers are yet to be laid in Danish waters, and about 28 kilometers or so have to be laid in German waters still. So you talk about where it starts, this Baltic Sea region, and where it comes out. So it comes out comes out on the German east. The German eastern side on Greifswald. So that incidentally falls under Angela Merkel's constituency. So I'd also like to bring up this fact. I kind of forgot about it. So you might have heard of this individual called Gerhard Schroeder, who was chancellor from 1998 to 2005. In Germany. So he has a very close relationship with the Russian President Putin, and he was at one point very agreeable to all the Russian investment coming in, all the Russian economic deals that were happening. He was very amenable to them. So incidentally, after he left office as chancellor, he was appointed to the board of the consortium that operates the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And in 2017, if I recall correctly, he was elected the chairman of Rosneft. So he definitely has very close ties to the Russian state hydrocarbon industry, and being a mainstream politician in such a high position, you can definitely see where I'm going. And he was part of the same coalition which is to this day ruling Germany. So you can make up your own mind with that.
What tangled webs we weave. It just goes to show that lobbying is not a problem that's unique to India or to the US, but something that shapes foreign policy in very meaningful ways all across the world. But on that note, thank you so much, Aditya. There's been an interesting conversation. Nord Stream 2 is definitely something that Russia geeks are going to want to follow over the coming months. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for listening to All Things Policy.
It was great to be here, Anirudh. Love to revisit this topic again in the future.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors very quickly this week, thewholetruthfoods.com, Storytel, and Seat. We really do appreciate your support. And we had a great week on the network this week. So tune in for some sweetness with our hosts Sadaf and Archit as they hone their sweet tooth and talk about candies. The famous, the healthy, the traditional, and international. Check out Naan Curry. You'll enjoy it. On last week's episode of The Note, Maruk and I spoke to TV presenter and columnist Veer Sanghvi, who analyzed the 2 years of the second term of the Modi government. As China and India signed the disengagement agreement along the LAC, Lieutenant General Dr. Prakash Menon and Manoj Kewalramani joined Suyash Desai to discuss the process and the consequences it will have on the nation and in world politics. Dr. Anton Harder joins Hamsani Hariharan on States of Anarchy to discuss India's right to a seat at the United States Security Council. Ashton Doctor talks about duty, how individually it binds us and how as a society it is liberating. Check out The Habit Coach with Ashton every day. Great show and great fun to listen to that. On Football Show to All the Boys to talk about their loves and sorrows for teams and their current ranks in the world of football. And also do remember to check out Cyrus Says. We had a great week last week. We had Amol Mazumdar, the ex-cricketer. We had Rocky and Mayur. And we did the Valentine special with Aisha and Kunal. Great fun. Do check it out. I'm sure you will enjoy that. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.